Hello, everyone. This week, we are going to be looking at the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, and the French Revolution. Three areas that were very much sort of set up by the ramifications of the Protestant Reformation, which caused really fundamental and landmark changes. And the image here, I'll get right to the factoid. I'm not going to make this too long because I know our opening announcements in this class were really long. But the image you see here next to me is an image I took from the Palace of Versailles. And this is located just outside of Paris, France. You know, a short train ride. It's not in Paris. You take a train to get there, but it's not a long train ride. I think it's maybe 20 kilometers away from Paris. Versailles was the palatial residence of King Louis XIV, the most famous of the French monarchs. He was known as being an absolute monarch, and he was the king of France in the 1600s and the early 1700s. And his period of time as king in France, again, was associated with a period of absolutism in French government, so there was no sort of active representative government. France did have a parliament, but the parliament was really never called during the entire reign of Louis XIV. The French parliament was known as the Estates General, and as we start examining the French Revolution, we'll be looking at some of the real problems with the Estates General, which really had never sort of developed after its original founding in the late Middle Ages. After Louis XIV died, Louis XV and then, of course, Louis XVI would have resided here at Versailles. And this is just a little portion of Versailles. This is kind of the main entrance to Versailles. Versailles is a massive, massive palace. And it really embodies what's known as the Baroque age. So the period of time of Louis XIV, of Louis XV, particularly in the 1700s, in the late 1600s, is known as the Baroque age. And it's a period of time that is really associated with extravagance in wealth and power for those in the aristocracy. And as a result of this, it's a period of time in which you have tremendous building projects, and you also have a massive amount of personal debt held by the aristocracy, and likewise by governments like the French government, who really failed to develop a tax policy that would be appropriate given the country's spending and its involvement in conflicts like the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War, and of course the American Revolution, both at the mid and later period of the 1700s. So this was the Baroque age in Western European history. And this is just one little portion of the Palace of Versailles, and I'm going to have an extra credit video in there that I have provided from Versailles that you can watch for extra credit, which will give more information about this incredible place to see and visit, and something that is really a historical artifact, again, to this period of absolute monarchy in France. This period, the Baroque age, this period of aristocracy and extravagance, and also a period that sowed the roots for the French Revolution. Because as we will see, it is really the extravagance and indebtedness, and then ultimately a failure in leadership of Louis XVI, not Louis XIV, but the failure of the leadership of Louis XVI and his inability to really reform this system that really leads to the development of the French Revolution. And here's the factoid. The French Revolution is regarded by historians as one of the ultimate turning points of history. It is a period of time in which we see in Western civilization, we see really the final, if you will, end to the sort of standards of the old medieval period of birthright monarchy, of of aristocracy. Not to say that aristocracy completely ends at this time, and not to say that this is the last time you have a monarch, but after the French Revolution, and of course the American Revolution before it, the new standard in governance and in economics in Western civilization becomes representative government. Representative government ideally centered on principles of individual and human rights, particularly rights for the citizenry at the time, and capitalist economics also increasingly displaces the old mercantilist systems that were so associated with colonial powers and monarchies at this time. So the French Revolution is one of the most important turning points in the history of Western civilization, a period in which the sort of old ways of feudal medieval Europe are eventually washed aside and replaced by the manners or the principles of more representative government, of democratic capitalism, and so forth, moving the world towards the modern age. So the French Revolution, a critical turning point in the development of the modern age. I'll have an extra credit video on Versailles for you in here as well. So let's have a great week.